The year was 1847, and in the rugged mountains of Arizona Territory, a young Apache woman named Ayanna sat alone by a dying fire, her face scarred by smallpox, her heart heavy with the weight of exile. She had been cast out by her own people, deemed too ugly to bring honor to their tribe. But sometimes, the cruelest fate can lead to the most unexpected salvation. Ayanna Running Deer had once been the pride of her Apache band. Born under the constellation her people called the Great Bear, she had shown promise as a healer and storyteller. Her mother, Winona, had been the tribe's medicine woman, and her father, Chief Dakota, had led their people with wisdom and strength through many harsh winters. But that was before the white man's disease came to their mountain home. The smallpox had swept through their camp like wildfire in dry grass. It took her parents first, then her younger brother Coda, and finally left its mark upon her face in the form of deep, pitted scars that would never fade. When the sickness passed and the dead were buried according to their customs, Ayanna found herself facing a council of elders who looked upon her with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You carry the mark of evil spirits," declared Mop, the eldest of the council. His weathered face showed no mercy as he pronounced judgment. "Your scars will bring bad fortune to any warrior who looks upon you. You cannot marry, you cannot bear children for our people. You are no longer welcome among us." Ayanna felt her world crumble like ancient stone. "But I am still Apache," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the council. "Fire, this is my home, my people. Where will I go? That is not our concern," Mop replied coldly. "You have until sunrise to gather your belongings and leave. If you are found in our territory after that, you will be treated as an enemy." With tears streaming down her scarred cheeks, Ayanna returned to the tipi she had shared with her family. Everything that had mattered to her was gone: her parents, her brother, her place in the world. She gathered what little she could carry: a worn deerskin dress, her mother's medicine pouch, a few tools, and a blanket that still smelled faintly of her mother's sage and sweetgrass. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ayanna walked away from the only life she had ever known. She did not look back, though she could feel the eyes of her former people watching her go. Some children pointed and whispered, but the adults turned away, as if looking upon her might bring the same curse to their own faces. For 3 moons, Ayanna wandered the high country, living off roots, berries, and small game she could catch with snares her father had taught her to make. She avoided the paths where Apache hunting parties might travel, staying to the rocky ridges and hidden valleys where few dared to venture. The loneliness was harder to bear than the hunger. She had grown up surrounded by the voices of her people, the laughter of children, the songs of the women as they worked, the stories the elders told around the fire. Now there was only the wind through the pines and the distant cry of hawks circling overhead. She made her camp in a small canyon protected by high red walls, where a spring bubbled up from the rocks to form a clear pool. Wild onions grew along the water's edge, and she found a cave large enough to shelter her from the worst of the storms. It was here, as autumn began to paint the aspen leaves gold, that she first saw the stranger. Ayanna had been gathering pine nuts when she heard the sound of a horse picking its way carefully down the rocky trail. She quickly hid behind a boulder, her heart pounding. If it was an Apache warrior, she would have to run. If it was a white soldier or settler, she might face an even worse fate. But the man who appeared was neither Apache nor cavalry. He was a cowboy by the look of his worn leather chaps and the way he sat his horse. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, and a week's worth of dark beard covered his jaw. He was leading a pack mule loaded with supplies, and both animals looked as weary as their master. The cowboy dismounted near the spring and let his horses drink while he knelt to splash water on his face. It was then that he saw the signs of her presence, the remains of a small fire, the bent grass where she had been gathering plants. "Hello there," he called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I'm not looking for trouble, just need to water my horses and rest a spell." Ayanna remained hidden, barely breathing. The man had a kind voice, but she had learned not to trust appearances. Still, something about his manner suggested he meant no harm. "I've got food to share if you're hungry," he continued, settling down. Beside the spring, jerky, hardtack, and some coffee beans. Been traveling for days and could use the company. The mention of coffee made Ayanna's mouth water. She had not tasted it since before the sickness came to her people. Slowly, carefully, she emerged from her hiding place, keeping her face turned away so the stranger could not see her scars. The cowboy looked up as she approached, and she steeled herself for the usual reaction, the sharp intake of breath, the look of horror, the turning away. Instead, he simply tipped his hat. "Name's Jeremiah Stone," he said. "Most folks call me Jed. Mind if I ask yours?" Ayanna hesitated. She had spoken to no one for months, and her English was rusty. I am. Called Ayanna," she said finally. "That's a pretty name," Jed replied, beginning to unpack his supplies. "Means eternal blossom in Apache, doesn't it?" She stared at him in surprise. Few white men knew her language, and fewer still would have bothered to learn the meaning of Apache names. "You speak my tongue, some," he admitted, switching to her language with a slight accent. "I lived with the Kirikahua for a winter when I was young. Chief Cochise's band took me in after my horse threw me and left me with a broken leg. They could have killed me, but they chose to heal me instead." Ayanna felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. If this man had been accepted by Cochise's people, perhaps he was not like the other white men she had heard about, the ones who killed Apache on sight. "You are far from Kirikahua lands," she observed. "Been traveling north," Jed explained, setting up a small camp. "Heard there might be work at the ranches up near Flagstaff. What about you?" This seems like a lonely place for a young woman to be camping alone. The question she had been dreading. Ayanna turned her face away again, but Jed seemed to notice her reluctance. "Don't mean to pry," he said gently. "We all got our reasons for being where we are. Mine's probably no better than yours." They shared his simple meal in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the canyon walls. Jed made coffee in a battered tin pot, and the bitter brew tasted like heaven to Ayanna. She found herself relaxing despite her caution. "You planning to stay in these mountains long?" Jed asked as they sat by the small fire he had built. "I have nowhere else to go," Ayanna replied, the words coming out before she could stop them. Jed studied her face in the firelight, and she saw the moment when he noticed her scars. But instead of revulsion, she saw something else in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "We all got our marks," he said quietly, pushing up his left sleeve to reveal a puckered scar that ran from his wrist to his elbow. "Mine came from a Comanche lance. Yours, the spotted sickness," she whispered. "It took my family, my people. Say I carry bad spirits now. Your people are fools," Jed said bluntly. "Scars don't make a person evil. They just show that someone survived something that should have killed them. That takes strength, not weakness." Ayanna felt tears prick her eyes. No one had spoken to her with such kindness since before the sickness came. "You do not find me ugly," Jed considered this seriously. "I find you different from other women I've known. But ugly? No, I see someone who's been through hell and came out the other side. That's not ugly, that's remarkable." Jed stayed by the spring for 3 days, resting his horses and sharing his supplies with Ayanna. During that time, she learned that he was a drifter, working cattle drives and ranch jobs wherever he could find them. He had no family, no permanent home, and seemed as much an outcast as she was, though for different reasons. "Killed a man in Texas," he admitted on the second night, staring into the fire. "He was beating a Mexican woman in an alley behind a saloon. I told him to stop. He drew on me instead. It was a fair fight, but the man's brother was the sheriff. Had to run. So you understand exile," Ayanna said. "I understand being alone," Jed replied. "But I've been thinking maybe we don't have to be alone anymore." Ayanna looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm heading north to find work. You're stuck here with nowhere to go. Maybe we could travel together. Watch each other's backs. Share the load. I am Apache," she said. "Your people and mine are enemies." "My people are whoever treats me decent," Jed replied. "Color of their skin doesn't matter to me. Besides, you speak English, you know the country, and you can take care of yourself. I could use a partner like that." Ayanna felt her heart leap with hope, but she forced herself to be practical. What kind of work would accept an Apache woman? Might be surprised, Jed said. Lot of ranchers up north are hiring anyone who can work. Some of them even got Mexican and Indian hands. We could say you're my wife, that'd give you protection and respectability. The word wife made Ayanna's cheeks burn. But we are not married. Not saying we have to be, Jed said quickly. Just saying that's what we'd tell people. Keep things simple, you know? Ayanna considered this. The alternative was to stay in this canyon forever, growing old alone with only the wind and the hawks for company. And if I said yes, what then? Then we pack up tomorrow morning and head north, find work, find a place to belong, make our own family out of what we got. That night, Ayanna lay awake in her cave, staring up at the stars through the opening. Everything in her life had been taken away: her parents, her brother, her place in the tribe, even her face. But perhaps from the ashes of all that loss, something new could grow. They left the canyon as the sun was painting the eastern peaks pink and gold. Jed had fashioned a pack frame for Ayanna to carry her belongings, and she walked beside his horse as they climbed out of the hidden valley. She had never ridden a horse Apache women usually walked or rode in travois, but Jed promised to teach her when they reached easier country. The first few days were hard. Ayanna's legs ached from the long miles, and she struggled to keep up with the horses, but gradually she grew stronger, and Jed proved to be patient and kind. He shared his food without complaint, helped her set up camp each night, and never made her feel like a burden. They stayed off the main trails, following game paths and old Indian routes. Through the mountains, Jed seemed to know the country well, and he explained that he had been traveling these lands for years. Learned to read sign from the Kirikahua, he said as they paused to rest beside a stream. They taught me to see what the land was saying, where the water was, which way the wind was blowing, what animals had passed by. Saved my life more times than I can count. Ayanna was impressed by his knowledge. Many white men blundered through the wilderness like blind buffalo, but Jed moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged to the land. On the 5th day, they encountered their first test. They had stopped to rest in a grove of cottonwoods when they heard the sound of horses approaching. Jed quickly motioned for Ayanna to hide behind a fallen log while he stepped out to meet the riders. There were 3 of them, rough-looking men, with the hard faces of men who lived by violence. Ayanna recognized the type from stories her father had told: outlaws and renegades, who preyed on travelers. Afternoon, the leader called out. He was a big man with pale eyes and a scar across his left cheek. Name's Briggs. These here are my partners, Cutter and Moss. We're looking for a man and a squaw who've been seen traveling north. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Ayanna's blood ran cold. Someone had seen them and reported their movements. But to whom and why? Can't say that I do, Jed replied calmly. Been traveling alone for days. Haven't seen anyone else on the trail. Briggs smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. That's funny, because we got word from some Apache down south that they're looking for a scarred woman who ran off from their camp. Seems there's a reward for bringing her back. Ayanna's heart hammered against her ribs. Her own people had put a price on her head. But why would they want her back after casting her out? Don't know nothing about that, Jed said. Like I said, I'm traveling alone. Mind if we look around? Briggs asked, already dismounting. Just to be sure? Actually, I do mind, Jed said, his hand moving casually to rest on his gun belt. This here's my camp, and I don't much like strangers poking around my belongings. The 3 men exchanged glances. They had come looking for easy prey: a lone Apache woman and her companion. They had not expected to find a man who looked like he knew how to use the Colt on his hip. No need to get unfriendly, Briggs said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. We're just doing a job. Then I suggest you do it somewhere else. Jed replied, before I start thinking you boys are up to no good. For a moment, Ayanna thought there would be gunplay. The 3 outlaws were weighing their chances against Jed's steady gaze and ready gun hand. But finally, Briggs decided the risk was too great. Come on, boys, he said, swinging back into his saddle. This fellow don't know nothing. Let's check the trail ahead. They rode off, But Ayanna knew they would not give up easily. Men like that were drawn to easy money like vultures to carrion. That night, camped in a hidden ravine, Ayanna finally told Jed the whole truth about her exile. She had been holding back parts of the story, but the encounter with the bounty hunters had changed everything. My mother was not just a medicine woman, she began, staring into their small fire. She was the keeper of our band's sacred objects. When she died, those objects should have passed to her successor. But there was disagreement about who that should be. Jed listened without interrupting as she explained the complex politics of her tribe. There had been 2 candidates to replace her mother, Ayanna herself, despite her youth, and Mop's daughter, Kimmy. The sacred objects included not just medicine bundles and ceremonial items, but also maps showing the locations of hidden water sources and secret trails through the mountains. When the council banished me, Ayanna continued, I took my mother's medicine pouch. I thought it was my right. She had been training me since I was a child. But the pouch contains more than herbs and sacred stones. It holds the location of a silver mine that my people have kept secret for generations. Jed whistled low. Silver? That explains why those boys were so interested in finding you. Someone figured out what you're carrying. Mop must have realized what I took, Ayanna said. He has probably promised a share of the silver to anyone who brings me back. What's this mine worth? Jed asked. Ayanna shrugged. I do not know. My mother never spoke of it directly, but she said it was enough to make our people rich for many generations if they chose to use it. And you've been carrying the map around this whole time? Ayanna nodded, touching the medicine pouch at her side. I did not think anyone would want it. I was just a scarred woman in exile. Jed was quiet for a long moment. Ayanna, that pouch makes you about the most valuable person in Arizona territory. Every prospector, outlaw, and fortune hunter in the Southwest would kill for what you're carrying. The weight of her situation settled on Ayanna like a heavy blanket. She had thought her exile was punishment for her appearance, but it had really been about greed and power. Mop had wanted to be rid of her so he could claim the sacred objects for his own family. What do we do now? She asked. We keep heading north, Jed said firmly. But we're going to have to be a lot more careful. And we might want to think about what we're going to do with that map once we reach safer territory. They changed their route the next morning, leaving the easier trails for rougher country that would be harder for the bounty hunters to follow. Jed taught Ayanna to ride his pack mule, and they made better time through the broken terrain. But their pursuers were persistent. Twice more they spotted dust clouds on their back trail, and once they had to hide in a cave while armed men searched the area around them. It was clear that word of the reward had spread, and they were being hunted by more than just Briggs and his partners. We need help, Jed said. On the 10th day of their journey, they were camped in a box canyon with only one way in or out. I know a place up ahead, trading post run by a fellow named Murphy. He's got no love for bounty hunters, and he might be willing to help us. Ayanna was skeptical. Why would he help an Apache woman? Because Murphy's got Apache blood himself. Jed explained. His mother was Kirikahua. He understands what it's like to be caught between 2 worlds. They reached Murphy's trading post the next afternoon. It was a low adobe building tucked into a valley between 2 mesas, with a corral for horses and a few scattered outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, and several horses were tied to the hitching rail outside. Stay close, Jed warned as they approached. Let me do the talking. Murphy turned out to be a middle-aged man with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent his life on the frontier. He greeted Jed with obvious pleasure. Jed Stone, haven't seen you in near 2 years. What brings you to my little corner of nowhere? Need a favor, Murphy, Jed said. This here's Ayanna. She's in some trouble, and we could use a safe place to rest for a few days. Murphy's eyes shifted to Ayanna, taking in her appearance without comment. What kind of trouble? The kind that involves men with guns and a price on her head, Jed replied. Murphy's expression grew serious. Come inside. We'll talk. The interior of the trading post was cramped but comfortable, with shelves lined with goods and a pot of coffee bubbling on the stove. Murphy poured them each a cup and listened while Jed explained their situation. Mop's bunch, Murphy said when Jed finished. I know them. They've been through here twice in the past week, asking questions about strangers on the trail. Didn't mention any reward, but they were mighty interested in finding a scarred woman. They put word out to every bounty hunter in the territory, Jed said. We've had 3 different groups tracking us. Murphy nodded thoughtfully. You're welcome to stay here, but it won't be safe for long. This is the first place they'll look, when they figure out you're not still running south. What do you suggest? Ayanna asked. There's a wagon train forming up in Flagstaff, Murphy said. Families heading to California. They're looking for scouts and guards. You could join up with them, safety in numbers, and once you're in California, you'll be out of Arizona territorial jurisdiction. Would they take us? Jed asked. They'd take you, Murphy said. Question is whether they'd take her. Lot of folks are still spooked about Indians, even peaceful ones. Then we'll make sure they don't know what she is, Jed said firmly. Murphy's wife, Maria, was a small, dark-haired woman with kind eyes and gentle hands. She took one look at Ayanna and immediately began planning. We'll need to change how you dress, she said, pulling out a trunk of women's clothing. These Apache buckskins mark you as clearly as a sign, and we'll need to do something about your hair. Ayanna's long black hair was braided in the traditional Apache style. Maria combed it out and arranged it in the loose bun favored by Mexican women, then helped her into a simple cotton dress and rebozo. What about her scars? Jed asked. Maria mixed a powder from several jars on her shelf. This will help hide them. Not completely, but enough that people won't stare. When Maria was finished, Ayanna looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The dress was strange and confining after a lifetime of wearing buckskin, but it transformed her appearance completely. You look like a Mexican woman now, Maria said with satisfaction. Perhaps from Sonora, where the smallpox was bad a few years ago. No one will question scars from that. Murphy nodded approvingly. It'll work. Jed, you'll need to work on your story. Where did you meet? How long have you been married? What's your destination in California? They spent the rest of the day creating their new identities. Jed became a cowboy from Texas looking for ranch work in California. Ayanna became his Mexican wife, Isabella, who had survived smallpox as a child and was now seeking a new life in the West. Practice your Spanish, Maria advised. If anyone asks, you're from a small village in Sonora. Don't volunteer information, but don't act mysterious either. The next morning, they prepared to leave for Flagstaff. Murphy had provided them with a worn but serviceable wagon and a team of horses. To anyone watching, they would look like just another couple of settlers heading west. What about the map? Ayanna asked quietly as they loaded their supplies. Keep it safe, Jed advised, but don't let it rule your life. Sometimes the best treasure is the one you never dig up. Flagstaff was a bustling frontier town full of miners, cowboys, and families preparing for the journey west. The wagon train was gathering in a meadow outside town, and the sight of dozens of covered wagons and hundreds of people was overwhelming to Ayanna, who had never seen so many white people in one place. The wagon master was a gruff man named Captain Reynolds, a former Army officer who had been leading trains to California for 10 years. He looked over Jed's horses and equipment with a critical eye. You got experience with Indians? Reynolds asked. Some, Jed replied. Lived with the Apache for a while. Know their ways. Good. We'll need scouts who can think like them. What about your wife? She looked like she can handle the trail. Ayanna kept her eyes downcast as Reynolds studied her. She's stronger than she looks, Jed said. And she knows the country. Mexican? Reynolds asked. From Sonora, Jed confirmed. Reynolds nodded. Well, we got all kinds on this train. Long as you can do the job and don't cause trouble, you're welcome to join us. They paid their fee and were assigned a place in the train. Their wagon was number 47 out of 62, positioned near the middle of the long column. Their neighbors were a German family named the Schmidts, with 3 young children, and an elderly couple from Missouri named the Harrises. As they set up camp that first night, Ayanna felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She was surrounded by more white people than she had ever imagined existed, and she was living a lie that could get her killed if discovered. But for the first time since her exile, she felt like she belonged somewhere. You're doing fine, Jed whispered as they prepared their bedroll. Just remember your Isabella Stone now. Apache Ayanna is dead and buried. The wagon train pulled out of Flagstaff on a clear morning in early October. Ayanna now Isabella walked beside their wagon, learning to manage the team of oxen. While Jed rode ahead with the other scouts, the first few days were hard. The oxen were stubborn. The wagon was heavy, and the trail was rough. But gradually she found her rhythm, and the other women in the train began to accept her as one of their own. Mrs. Schmidt, the German woman, was particularly kind. She had 4 children, and the youngest, a boy named Hans, took a special liking to Ayanna. He would walk beside her wagon, chattering in his mixture of German and English, and she found herself teaching him simple Spanish words in return. "Isabella, you are so good with the children," Mrs. Schmidt said one evening as they prepared dinner. "Do you have little ones of your own?" The question hit Ayanna like a physical blow. Among her people, a woman with her scars would never be allowed to marry or have children. "No," she said quietly. "God has not blessed us yet. He will," Mrs. Schmidt said confidently. "You and your husband, you have good hearts. God sees this." The weeks on the trail passed in a blur of dust, sweat, and constant motion. They crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and pushed through desert country that reminded Ayanna painfully of home. But gradually, she began to think of the wagon train as a kind of family, and the other travelers as her people. Jed proved to be an excellent scout. His knowledge of Indian ways and his ability to read the land made him invaluable to Captain Reno. He guided them around potential ambush sites, found water in seemingly barren country, and helped negotiate with the various tribes they encountered along the way. One evening, as they camped beside a small stream, Jed found Ayanna sitting alone, staring up at the stars, thinking about home. He asked, "Thinking about family," she replied. "These people, they have accepted me as one of their own. They do not see Apache when they look at me. They see Isabella, Jed's wife, a woman who helps with their children and shares their hardships." "That's because that's who you are now," Jed said. "The past is dead, Ayanna. Whatever happens from here on, you're building a new life." "But what if they discover the truth?" "They won't," Jed said confidently. "You've become Isabella so completely that sometimes I forget you were ever anyone else." Their security was shattered 3 weeks into the journey. They had stopped for the night in a valley along the Gila River when riders appeared on the horizon. Ayanna's heart sank as she recognized the lead figure. It was Briggs, the bounty hunter who had confronted them weeks earlier. "Stay calm," Jed murmured as the riders approached the wagon train. "You're Isabella Stone, and you've never seen these men before in your life." Captain Reynolds rode out to meet the strangers. Ayanna could hear voices raised in conversation, but she could not make out the words. After several minutes, Reynolds returned with a grim expression. "These men are looking for a fugitive," he announced to the gathered travelers. "An Apache woman wanted for theft. They have permission to search the train." Ayanna felt her knees go weak. The moment she had been dreading had finally arrived. She watched as Briggs and his men began moving through the wagons, questioning the women and examining their faces. "What do we do?" she whispered to Jed. "We trust in our story," he replied. "And we trust in these people who've come to know you." When Briggs reached their wagon, he looked directly at Ayanna. She felt his eyes examining her face, searching for the Apache woman he had been hunting. "This your wife?" he asked Jed. "Yes," Jed replied calmly. "Isabella Stone. We're heading to California. She's Mexican?" "From Sonora," Jed confirmed. Briggs studied Ayanna more closely. The face powder Maria had given her had faded during the weeks on the trail, and her scars were clearly visible. But the dress, the hairstyle, and the way she carried herself had transformed her completely. "Scars from smallpox?" Briggs asked. "Yes," Ayanna replied in Spanish accented English. "Very bad sickness when I was a young girl." For a moment, Briggs hesitated. Then Mrs. Schmidt stepped forward. "This is our friend Isabella," she said firmly. "She has been with us since Flagstaff. A good woman, very kind to the children." Other voices joined in, defending Ayanna's character and confirming her identity. The bounty hunter found himself facing a wall of support from people who had come to know And trust her. Apache woman would be darker, old Mr. Harris observed, and she wouldn't speak Spanish like that. This here's a Mexican lady, plain as day. Finally, Briggs gave up. If you see anyone matching the description, you let us know, he told Reynolds. There's good money in it. As the bounty hunters rode away, Ayanna felt tears streaming down her cheeks. These people, strangers, who had every reason to fear and distrust her, had protected her. Without hesitation, "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Schmidt said softly, putting an arm around her shoulders. The wagon train reached California in early December, crossing the Sierra Nevada just ahead of the winter snows. They arrived in the Sacramento Valley to find a land transformed by the gold rush, with new towns springing up overnight and fortunes being made and lost daily. Jed and Ayanna, now thoroughly established as Isabella, settled in a small farming community called Willow Creek, about 50 miles east of Sacramento. Jed found work as a foreman on a large cattle ranch, while Ayanna helped the ranch owner's wife with household duties and childcare. Their employer, Samuel Morrison, was a kind man who had come west with his family to start a new life. His wife, Ruth, was a gentle woman who had lost a daughter to scarlet fever and found comfort in Ayanna's presence. "You're a godsend, Isabella," Ruth said one evening as they prepared dinner for the ranch hands. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Ayanna smiled, feeling a warmth she had not experienced since childhood. "You have given me home, Mrs. Morrison. This is a gift I can never repay." As winter turned to spring, Ayanna found herself truly happy for the first time since her exile. She had work that mattered, people who cared about her, and a future that seemed bright with possibility. But most importantly, she had Jed. Their pretend marriage had gradually become something real, built on mutual respect, shared hardship, and growing affection. They had not yet spoken of love, but Ayanna could see it in his eyes when he looked at her, and she felt it growing in her own heart. One evening in early spring, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the hills, gold and purple, Jed finally spoke what they had both been feeling. "Isabella," he said softly, "I know this started as a lie, but somewhere along the way, it became the truth. I love you, not the Apache woman you used to be, not the Mexican woman you pretend to be, but the real you, the woman who survived exile and found the strength to build a new life." Ayanna felt her heart soar. "And I love you, Jed Stone. You saved me from loneliness and gave me a family. You showed me that scars do not define a person, that love can grow even in the hardest ground." They were married officially in the little church in Willow Creek, with the Morrison family and their friends from the wagon train as witnesses. Mrs. Schmidt cried during the ceremony, and even gruff Captain Reynolds wiped his eyes. A year after their marriage, Ayanna finally showed Jed the contents of her mother's medicine pouch. Among the herbs and sacred objects was a piece of bark with markings that looked like a child's drawings, but were actually a map showing the location of the silver mine. "It's about 60 miles south of where we used to live," she explained, tracing the symbols with her finger, "near a peak that looks like a sleeping bear. My mother said the mine was worked by our ancestors generations ago, but they sealed it up when the Spanish came." Jed studied the map carefully. "This could be worth a fortune," he said. "Enough to buy our own ranch, maybe even a small town." "Do you want to go back?" Ayanna asked. "Try to find it." Jed considered this for a long moment, then carefully folded the bark and handed it back to her. "No," he said firmly, "that life is behind us now. We've got something more valuable than silver. We've got a home, friends, and each other. Some treasures are better left buried." Ayanna smiled and tucked the map back into the medicine pouch. He was right. The silver might have made them rich, but it would also have brought back all the pain and conflict they had left behind. Their real treasure was the life they had built together. 5 years passed in peaceful contentment. Jed became the ranch foreman, and Ayanna, still known to everyone as Isabella, became like a daughter to the Morrisons. They had their own small house on the ranch, a garden where Ayanna grew vegetables and herbs, and a place in the community that felt as solid as stone. Then, one autumn day, their past caught up with them in an unexpected way. Ayanna was hanging laundry behind their house when she saw a familiar figure walking up the road. Her heart nearly stopped. It was a young Apache man in traditional dress, but with something different about his bearing. As he came closer, she realized with shock that it was her younger cousin, Idak, whom she had thought dead from the smallpox. "Ayanna running deer," he said in Apache, his voice filled with wonder. "We thought you were dead." She glanced around quickly to make sure no one else was watching, then motioned him behind the house where they could speak privately. "I am called Isabella now," she said in Apache, her voice shaking. What are you doing here? How did you find me?" "I have been searching for 2 years," Idak replied. "Our people. Things have changed since you left. Mop is dead, killed in a fight with the cavalry. His daughter Kimmy died of the coughing sickness last winter. The sacred objects were lost when soldiers raided our camp." Ayanna felt a mixture of sadness and relief. The people who had banished her were gone, but so were the sacred items her mother had protected. "Why did you search for me?" she asked. "Because you are the last keeper of the old ways," Idak said. "The young people have forgotten the stories, the ceremonies, the location of the sacred places. Without you, our history dies. I was banished," Ayanna said bitterly, "cast out for being ugly. Why should I care what happens to that history? Because you are still Apache," Idak said simply. "The blood in your veins, the language you speak, the knowledge your mother gave you, these things cannot be taken away by cruel words or ignorant fears." They talked for an hour, hidden behind the house while Ayanna learned what had happened to her people. The band had been moved to a reservation, their traditional lands taken by white settlers. Many of the old people had died, and the young ones were being sent to government schools where they were forbidden to speak Apache or practice their customs. "We need you to come back," Idak said finally. "Not to live with us, I understand you have made a new life here, but to teach the children, to preserve the stories, to keep our culture alive." Ayanna felt torn. The Apache people had rejected her when she needed them most. Why should she help them now? But as she looked at her young cousin, she saw not the cruel faces of those who had banished her, but the next generation children who would grow up without knowing who they were or where they came from if someone didn't preserve that knowledge. "I need time to think," she said finally, "and I need to talk to my husband." That evening, Ayanna told Jed about her cousin's visit and his request. They sat on their porch, watching the stars come out while she struggled with the decision. "Part of me wants to tell him no," she admitted. "They threw me away when I was broken. Why should I help them now?" "Because you're better than they are," Jed said quietly. "You survived their cruelty and built something beautiful out of the ashes. That takes a kind of strength they'll never understand. But if I help them, people here might learn the truth about who I am. We could lose everything we've built." Jed took her hand. "Isabella, you've been hiding for 5 years. Maybe it's time to stop running from who you are and start embracing it." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're Apache. That's not something to be ashamed of, it's something to be proud of. You come from a people who've survived in this harsh land for centuries, who've fought for their freedom, who've preserved their culture against impossible odds. That's the blood that flows in your veins." Ayanna stared at him in surprise. "You would not mind if people knew?" "Mind? I'd be proud. My wife isn't just Isabella Stone, the Mexican woman who helps with the children. She's Ayanna Running Deer, keeper of ancient wisdom, survivor of exile, bridge between two worlds. That's something worth celebrating, not hiding." Tears streamed down Ayanna's face. After years of pretending to be someone else, the idea of being herself again was both terrifying and liberating. "What about the Morrisons, the community? What if they reject us?" "Then they're not the people we thought they were," Jed said firmly. "But I think you might be surprised. These folks have known you for 5 years. They've seen your character, your kindness, your strength. That doesn't change just because they learn your true heritage." The next morning, Ayanna made her decision. She found Idak camping by the river and told him she would help, but on her own terms. "I will not return to the reservation," she said, "but I will teach any young people who come here to learn, and I will write down the stories and ceremonies so they will not be lost." Idak's face lit up with joy. "The elders will be so grateful. You are saving our people's soul. There's one condition," Ayanna continued. "I must tell my friends here the truth about who I am. I will not build this new relationship on lies." That evening, She and Jed went to the Morrison house for dinner, as they did every Sunday. But this time, Ayanna had something to say. "Mr. and Mrs. Morrison," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "I have something to tell you, something I should have told you years ago." The elderly couple looked at her with concern. "What is it, dear?" Ruth asked. "My name is not Isabella Stone. It is Ayanna Running Deer, and I am Apache." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Ayanna held her breath, waiting for the shock, the rejection, the fear she had seen so many times before. Instead, Samuel Morrison began to chuckle. Then Ruth joined in, and soon they were both laughing. "Is that all?" Ruth said, wiping her eyes. "Dear child, we've known that for years." Ayanna stared at them in shock. "You knew?" "Matter," Ruth said. "Dear, you've been like a daughter to us. You've brought joy to our home and peace to our hearts. Why would we care what tribe you were born into?" Ayanna felt as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "So you don't mind if Apache young people come here to learn?" "Mind," Samuel said. "I think it's wonderful. This ranch has always been a place where people could find a fresh start. Why should that be any different for Indian children?" Word spread slowly through the Apache communities on the reservations. There was a woman in California, they said, who remembered the old ways, a keeper of stories who could teach the children what the government schools were trying to make them forget. They came in small groups, at first young men and women, who had heard whispers of their heritage and wanted to learn more. Ayanna taught them in the evenings after her work was done, sharing the stories her mother had told her, the ceremonies she remembered, the songs that had been passed down through generations. She also began writing everything down, creating a record that could survive even if the oral tradition was lost. Jed helped her, translating when necessary and adding his own knowledge of Apache customs learned during his time. With Coach I's band, the work was demanding, but deeply satisfying. For the first time since her exile, Ayanna felt truly useful. She was not just surviving, she was preserving something precious for future generations. As word of her work spread, other tribes began sending representatives. Navajo, Pueblo, even some Mexican Indians who had lost touch with their own cultures. The little ranch in Willow Creek became an unexpected center of learning, a place where indigenous knowledge was preserved and passed on. The local communities' reaction was mixed. Some people were suspicious of the Apache visitors, but most were curious and supportive. The Morrison Ranch had always been known for its hospitality, and that reputation continued under Ayanna's influence. "You've turned this place into something special," Ruth Morrison told her one evening as they watched a group of young Apache learning to make traditional baskets, a bridge between worlds. "That is what my name means," Ayanna replied. "Eternal blossom. My mother said I was born to help things grow." 7 years after their marriage, Jed and Ayanna were finally blessed with a child, a daughter they named Hope. She had her father's green eyes and her mother's black hair, and she was the light of their lives, but their happiness was shadowed by loss. Ruth Morrison had been ill for months, and despite Ayanna's knowledge of healing herbs, the older woman grew steadily weaker. "Promise me something," Ruth whispered to Ayanna as she lay dying. "Promise me you'll continue this work. These children need you. Our people need you." "I promise," Ayanna said, tears streaming down her face. Ruth squeezed her hand. "You saved us all, you know. Samuel and I were just rattling around in this big house, missing our daughter, feeling like our lives were over. Then you came, and suddenly we had purpose again. We had family." Ruth Morrison died peacefully in her sleep, and the entire community turned out for her funeral. Ayanna spoke at the service, her voice clear and strong as she talked about the woman who had given her a second chance at family. After the funeral, Samuel Morrison made an announcement that shocked everyone. "Ruth and I never had sons," he said. "We lost our only daughter when she was young. But over the years, Jed and Isabella Ayanna became the children we never had. I'm leaving the ranch to them when I pass. They've earned it with their love and their service to this community." As Hope grew, she became a bridge between cultures in ways her parents had never expected. She spoke English, Spanish, and Apache with equal fluency. She played with the Mexican children from the neighboring farms, learned basket weaving from her Apache cousins, and attended the little white schoolhouse in town. She is what the future looks like, Ayanna told Jed one evening as they watched, their daughter playing with children of 3 different ethnicities. Not one thing or another, but all things together. When Hope turned 5, something unexpected happened. A delegation of Apache elders arrived at the ranch, led by Chief Nate, son of the great Cochise. We have come to honor Ayanna running. Dear, the chief announced, the woman who was cast out has become the keeper of our people's heart. We ask her forgiveness for the wrongs done to her, and we ask her to accept the title of grandmother of stories, teacher of the next generation. Ayanna felt her eyes fill with tears. The recognition she had been denied all those years ago was finally being offered to her. But more than that, her people were acknowledging that they had been wrong to judge her by her appearance rather than her character. I forgive, she said simply, and I accept, but I will continue my work here, where all people can learn from each other. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything the Willow Creek community had ever seen. Apache, Mexican, and white families gathered together as Ayanna was formally invested with her new title. Children of all backgrounds sat in a circle as she told the ancient stories, their faces wrapped with wonder. This is how it should be, old Samuel Morrison said to Jed as they watched the ceremony. People learning from each other instead of fearing each other. 20 years after her arrival in California, Ayanna running Deer Stone, for she had legally taken both her birth name and her married name, was known throughout the Southwest as a teacher, healer, and bridge between cultures. The ranch had become a school where children of all backgrounds could learn about their heritage, while also preparing for life in the modern world. Hope, now a young woman, worked alongside her mother, carrying on the tradition of preserving and sharing cultural knowledge. One evening, as 3 generations of the Stone family sat on their porch, watching the sunset, Hope asked her mother a question that had been on her mind for years. Mother, do you ever regret leaving your Apache life behind? Ayanna considered this carefully. I did not leave it behind, she said finally. I carried it with me and found a way to make it part of something larger. The woman who was banished all those years ago thought her life was ending. She could not see that it was really just beginning. What about the silver mine? Hope asked. Do you ever wonder what might have been? Ayanna smiled and looked at her husband, her daughter, the ranch that had become a beacon of learning and acceptance. I found a treasure greater than silver, she said. I found a family, a purpose, and a way to turn exile into opportunity. That is worth more than all the gold in California. As the stars came out over the valley, Ayanna reflected on the long journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been cast out for her looks, had lost everything she thought mattered, had wandered in the wilderness like a lost soul. But from that loss had come something beautiful, a life of meaning, a love that transcended cultural boundaries, and a legacy that would outlive them all. The Apache girl who had been banished for her scars had become a woman whose true beauty lay not in her appearance, but in her strength, her compassion, and her ability to heal the divisions that separated people from one another. In the end, that was the greatest treasure of all.